Very good morning to you. Welcome to Breakfast with Roger Johnson and Louise Minchin.
Our headlines today: the number of coronavirus deaths passes 10,000 as the UK enters its fourth week of lockdown.
Out of hospital and grateful to be alive, the Prime Minister recuperates at his country residence Chequers.
The two worst hit European countries, Italy and Spain, are easing some of their lockdown restrictions.
Good morning. In sport, tributes are paid to one of the greats of Formula One. Sir Stirling Moss was regarded as the best driver never to win the world title. He passed away aged 90.
Good morning. It's Easter Monday, the 13th of April. The top story this morning: the UK is facing its fourth week in lockdown, with the government set to review by Thursday whether social distancing measures can be changed.
The number of deaths in the UK caused by the coronavirus outbreak has now reached more than 10,000. Our correspondent Lee Milner reports.
The faces of those who have died from coronavirus, described by the Health Secretary as the invisible killer, which has now taken more than 10,000 lives in the UK. Among them, healthcare workers like Dr Edmund Adedeji, who is based in Swindon. Questions are now being asked just how many on the front line have lost their lives to save others.
I don't have an update on the figure of 19 NHS staff who've died that I gave yesterday, but what I can tell you is that we are looking into each circumstance to understand how they caught the virus and making sure that we learn as much as we possibly can and therefore, of course, protect our health workers as much as possible.
According to Public Health England, the number of people in hospital with coronavirus in London is stabilising, but it's now increasing in places such as the northwest and northeast of England, as well as Yorkshire.
Can you all go home, please? It's not a holiday, it's a lockdown.
Today marks 3 weeks since lockdown began. It's understood that ministers will meet later this week to review the social distancing measures. Despite the warm bank holiday weekend, the streets of London were empty and motorways almost abandoned as people listened to the pleas to stay close to home. Yesterday, the sister of Sarah Trollope, a matron on a psychiatric ward in northwest London who recently died after contracting the virus, gave this poignant message to the public.
For me, stay at home. Don't let my sister and all the other NHS staff and all the people that have died from this virus, don't let their deaths be in vain. Stay at home.
With only 1 day left of the 4-day bank holiday weekend, the message remains the same. Stay at home, protect the NHS and save lives. Lee Milner, BBC News.
Boris Johnson is recuperating at his country residence Chequers after spending a week in hospital suffering from COVID-19. In a video message, the Prime Minister paid tribute to the NHS, particularly mentioning two nurses, Jenny McGee from New Zealand and Luís Pitama from Portugal, who looked after him by his bedside. Earlier, Jenny's parents spoke to TVNZ about their daughter.
It makes us feel exceptionally proud, obviously. But she has told us these things over the years, and it doesn't matter what patient she's looking after. This is what she does, and I just find it incredible that any nurses can do this for 12 hours, sit and watch a patient and twiddle away with all the different knobs and things they do to keep their patients alive. It's absolutely amazing.
Two very proud parents there. Our political correspondent Helen Catt joins us now from our central London newsroom. And Helen, the Prime Minister convalescing at Chequers, what do we know about his condition now?
Well, we know that he was well enough to leave St Thomas's Hospital after a week yesterday afternoon, that he was well enough to record that very heartfelt message for social media yesterday, thanking the NHS staff who treated him. But we also know that he is not well enough to go straight back to work. Instead, on medical advice, he's recuperating at the Prime Minister's country residence in Buckinghamshire, Chequers. So we know that. We also now know, because of his message yesterday, quite how serious things got for him last week. He talked about a 48-hour period where things could have gone either way, and put down the fact that he pulled through to those two nurses, Jenny McGee and Luís Pitama, Starmer, who you just mentioned there. So while Boris Johnson is recuperating, that means that Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, remains deputising for him. The government and the cabinet, they've got quite a lot of things to look at over the coming week, because we got, of course, that stark reminder yesterday with the number of people who've died passing 10,000. A stark reminder that a lot of people are not as lucky as the Prime Minister has been, that the cabinet, the government, they've still got to deal with this pandemic to try and get those numbers sort of under control. And of course, first thing they've got to do is look at those lockdown restrictions. There is a legal limit on that has to be reviewed by Thursday, although all the signs are that it is very, very, very unlikely that those restrictions will change.
Helen Catt, thank you.
The two European countries worst hit by the pandemic, Italy and Spain, are easing some of the lockdown restrictions that were imposed several weeks ago. Earlier, we heard from our correspondent Damien McGuinness in Berlin, who told us how significant the changes are across Europe.
Well, it's a big step for Europe, really, because, as you say, these countries are really hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. What's going to happen today is that Spain is going to open construction and manufacturing and certain similar sectors to get people back to work and to really get the economy going again. Italy is also going to allow some businesses to reopen from tomorrow. Italy has already started some aspects of manufacturing over the past week. Really, the aim for both governments is to get the economies going. But of course, the challenge is, how do you do that while preventing a fresh outbreak of the pandemic? So these measures are controversial, particularly in Spain, where this is a decision taken by central government in Madrid, but the Catalonian government has called it irresponsible. The difficulty, of course, is, on the one hand, you need to get economies going because people's livelihoods depend on these businesses. If you do it too early, though, and you spark off a fresh pandemic, all it means is you have to go into a more strict lockdown again. What is still the case, though, in both countries is that the lockdown on movement between people and social contact, and some very strict measures there about not being allowed to go outside unless strictly necessary, are very much still in place. And that's going to last for another couple of weeks at least, really. But what they're trying to do is get the economy moving again. And that's a challenge facing all European countries.
That was Damien McGuinness there speaking to us a little earlier. Now, nearly 200 members of the armed forces are being deployed to support ambulance services in England and Wales. Personnel from all three strands of the armed forces will be sent to work at 5 ambulance trusts. They'll carry out a range of tasks, including driving emergency response vehicles, moving critical care patients between intensive care units and taking calls from the public.
The Fire Brigades Union is urging the government to start testing firefighters in England who are self-isolating because they have symptoms.
Testing has either started or been promised in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Tom Simons.
We're supposed to be in lockdown, but firefighters still had to deal with this fire near Bolton, thought to have been caused by a barbecue. And today the Firefighters Union is warning that the need for staff to isolate themselves is affecting the number of frontline firefighters and controllers. According to the union, Bedfordshire is the worst affected, with 12% fewer staff overall. The London Fire Brigade is down 10%, that's 472 firefighters and control room staff. The West Midlands service is missing 7.5%, while the control room at West Yorkshire Fire Service is coping with 16% fewer people.
Shake it out, make sure it's all opened up.
Fire services are taking on new roles in the crisis, so the union wants staff to be tested to get them back to work. It says in Northern Ireland, 50 firefighters with symptoms have been tested. There are programmes planned in Scotland and Wales, but there are no firm commitments from the Home Office in England.
I think we're increasingly frustrated at the approach of central government, particularly in Westminster. We've got some progress in Scotland. We've got some testing of firefighters started in Scotland. We've got some testing of firefighters in Northern Ireland. We've seen no progress from the Westminster government so far. And it seems to be just left to the Fire and Rescue Service to get on with it or not, and that's not acceptable.
In a statement, a Westminster government spokesman said fire services were doing incredible work helping with the crisis, and it was working with fire chiefs to ensure they had the resources and support they needed. Tom Simons, BBC News.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.